Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a cold, harsh glare across the narrow security checkpoint. Marla Kane's wrists were cuffed behind her back, the steel biting into her skin through the thin tactical gloves she refused to remove. Her uniform was disheveled, smudged with dirt and sweat from the scuffle moments ago. Around her, 3 burly security officers whispered, their voices low but charged with authority. "Strip, search her," the youngest barked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Marla's eyes narrowed. She forced her hands to relax, letting the tension build inside her chest instead. Every fiber of her Navy SEAL training screamed at her to react, but she stayed perfectly still. The metal floor was cold under her knees, and the distant hum of surveillance cameras added a mechanical heartbeat to the scene. The lead officer, a man with a face carved from years of authority, stepped closer. His breath smelled faintly of cheap coffee. "We've got a Code 3 suspicion. Protocol says," his words cut off when Marla's gaze met his, calm but burning with quiet steel. "I know exactly who you think I am," she said, voice low and unyielding, but the officers didn't understand yet. Time seemed to slow. A bead of sweat slid down Marla's temple as the youngest officer's hand hesitated over the security scanner. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the anticipation of revealing herself at the perfect moment. Every second of hesitation was a trap laid by the universe, daring her to make a mistake. The sound of her own controlled breathing filled her ears, a silent drumbeat of resolve. Behind the grimy glass partition, the shadows of passers-by flickered like specters, oblivious to the storm about to erupt. Marla's mind raced through every possible exit, every scenario, but she stayed planted. One mistake, one wrong word, and her cover would blow. And not just her cover, her identity, her secrets, and years of hard-earned command could vanish in a heartbeat. "Do it," the lead officer finally snapped, voice slicing through the quiet tension. He gestured sharply, and the younger guards approached, fumbling with the procedure. Marla's lips curled slightly into a controlled smirk. Let them think this was about authority, about intimidation. They didn't know she had faced far worse. Deep under that uniform, beneath the imposed vulnerability, was a Navy SEAL Admiral operating undercover, every muscle trained, every instinct lethal. Her mind flashed briefly to the mission that had brought her here, exposing a high-level smuggling ring within the military supply chain. Every officer in this room was part of a chessboard she had been playing for months, and now the pawns were moving themselves. As the lead officer's hand reached toward her belt, Marla's body tensed, coiled like a spring, waiting for the exact second to strike. Then a soft beep from the scanner jolted everyone's attention. Marla took a micro-step forward, and in the subtle movement, every guard sensed something, but too late. Her eyes locked on the youngest officer, and a small, almost imperceptible smirk spread across her face. She whispered under her breath, "You picked the wrong person to humiliate today." The air thickened. The tension was palpable, stretching like steel wire across the room. Outside, the storm of city traffic rattled against the reinforced glass, but inside, time held its breath. One wrong move would end badly for her, but inside her, a storm had already begun to break. And then, the youngest officer froze as if struck by an invisible force. Marla's hands, though cuffed, flexed with precise control. The lead officer's voice cracked, a hint of doubt creeping in. Every eye in the room shifted toward her, realization dawning. But would they connect the dots before it was too late? Years earlier, Marla Kane had been barely out of her 20s, standing on the rain-soaked docks of Norfolk, Virginia, staring at the hulking gray silhouette of the USS Providence. The sea smelled of salt and diesel, the wind tugging at her soaked hair and uniform. This was where it all began, the crucible that forged her into a Navy SEAL, long before anyone would ever call her an admiral. The first days were brutal. Her instructors were merciless, their voices sharp as the cold Atlantic wind, driving recruits past pain, past fear, into sheer survival mode. Marla learned quickly that hesitation meant failure, failure meant death. Every drill, every exercise, was a test not just of physical strength but of mind and will. She fell countless times, face into mud, hands blistered and bleeding, but each fall was a lesson, each bruise a badge she wore silently. In the barracks, whispers circled about her, too small, too slight, too underestimated. But Marla let them talk. She observed, memorized, and adapted. The quiet moments between grueling runs became her secret advantage. Studying patterns, memorizing shifts and guard routines, predicting movements before anyone else. Those who mocked her never realized the storm brewing behind her steady gaze. Months turned into years. Marla rose through the ranks not by charm, not by politics, but by precision and ruthlessness in the field. She led missions in the scorching deserts of the Middle East, in the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, each operation more dangerous than the last. She carried the lives of her team in her hands, every decision measured and exact. Yet behind every successful extraction, there was a cost. Friendships lost, trust betrayed, sleep forever fractured by the echo of screams and gunfire. By her mid-30s, Marla had earned the respect of commanders and the fear of enemies. Her promotion to admiral was unprecedented. She was the youngest in decades, but she never flaunted it. Instead, she carried her rank like armor, a shield that allowed her to operate in the shadows, unseen, underestimated, invisible when she needed to be. She knew power was nothing without precision, and influence without secrecy was suicide. And then came the operation that changed everything. Intelligence revealed a sophisticated network siphoning military-grade supplies into the black market. The corruption ran deep, infecting logistics, procurement officers, even trusted commanders. The Navy needed someone to infiltrate the system. Someone no one would suspect. Someone capable of surviving suspicion, humiliation, and danger. That someone was Marla. The plan required a cover identity so convincing it could fool even the most trained security personnel. An unremarkable logistic consultant, small, overlooked, carrying nothing that screamed military elite. 4 months, she practiced every nuance, walking with a civilian rhythm, adopting casual speech patterns, carrying the proper documents, even mimicking the slightest hesitations that suggested uncertainty. Her entire career had led to this single point, the ability to be humiliated, controlled, and underestimated, all while gathering intelligence to dismantle a criminal empire from within. She had rehearsed every scenario, except for one, being caught, cuffed, and threatened in a tight, fluorescent-lit room, the command to strip search, echoing around her like a guillotine's whisper. The irony was cruel, delicious even. All the years of training, the victories, the pain, the rise to admiral, had led her here, face to face with men who didn't know she was more dangerous than any of them could imagine. And yet, even in this moment of apparent vulnerability, Marla smiled just enough. She had been here before, in deserts, jungles, and combat zones, and she had always emerged alive. Now, in the cold, fluorescent glare, her hands might be cuffed, but her mind was free. And freedom, she knew, was more lethal than any weapon in their arsenal. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering like nervous signals. Marla Kane's wrists ached from the cuffs, but her posture remained perfectly straight, radiating calm. The 3 security officers moved like predators sensing prey, clumsy, inexperienced, unaware that the woman kneeling in front of them had survived battles where men twice their size didn't make it out alive. The youngest officer, a pale man with anxious eyes, shifted nervously. She's resisting, he muttered, glancing at the lead officer for guidance. The older man's face tightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. She's hiding something, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Check her back. Strip. Marla's mind was a razor, slicing through each potential outcome. She had trained for combat, for extraction, for betrayal, but the mental games, the intimidation tactics, these were equally dangerous. She knew every sound in the room, every shadow cast by the harsh lights. She smelled the faint coffee on the lead officer's breath, heard the uneven tapping of shoes on the cold floor, saw the nervous twitch of the youngest officer's hand hovering over the scanner. She spoke softly, almost a whisper, letting the words carry the weight of command without raising her voice. If you proceed, you will regret it. The officers froze. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was lethal in its calm precision. Time slowed. The youngest officer's hand trembled, the scanner forgotten. Marla's eyes flicked toward the corner of the room. A reflection in the polished glass wall hinted at movement. An ally? An enemy? Her instincts flared. She had trained to detect threats invisible to the average eye. In a heartbeat, she calculated distances, angles, possibilities. One move, one misstep, and the situation could explode. The lead officer stepped closer, voice rough. We have orders. Identification, now. Marla's heart beat steadily, her muscles coiled beneath the cuffed sleeves. She shifted slightly, enough to feel the leverage in her stance. She knew the moment was coming, when her cover would shatter, when her identity as a Navy SEAL Admiral would be revealed in a way that would leave everyone reeling. The youngest officer glanced at his colleagues, doubt mingling with fear. Maybe she's not what we think, he stammered. The lead officer's head snapped toward him, fury and authority colliding, but Marla's mind had already set the plan. A single phrase, a single motion could turn their confusion into chaos. She inhaled slowly, visualizing the next 3 moves like a master chess player. The cuffs, the steel, the fluorescent glare, they were all pieces on the board and she was the hand controlling them. One swift twist of her body, one precise strike against the nearest threat, and the power dynamics would flip entirely. Outside, a faint echo of boots resonated in the corridor. The other security personnel were unaware of the tension building inside, unaware that the woman kneeling under their orders was calculating the exact second to take control. Marla's eyes locked on the lead officer. He had no idea he was facing someone who had orchestrated multi-million-dollar missions, someone whose very presence commanded respect and fear simultaneously. Her lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. The wordless message was clear: underestimate me and you'll regret it. Her mind raced through contingencies, escape routes, hand-to-hand strategies, alarms, and yet her outward appearance remained calm, fragile, even as if she were just another civilian caught in protocol. The youngest officer's hand hovered over the cuff lock, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Marla Kane's mind snapped into focus. Every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of fluorescent light became part of her battlefield. One motion, one perfectly timed movement. That was all it would take to turn humiliation into control. She shifted her weight slightly, a subtle pivot of the torso, so that her cuffed hands pressed against the edge of the steel bench. The youngest officer flinched at the motion, instinctively stepping back, uncertainty creeping into his posture. Marla's eyes flicked to the lead officer, whose glare masked the first hints of doubt. She allowed a faint, controlled smirk, letting the tension linger like smoke in the cold air. Then, with the precision of a predator, Marla executed a swift turn. Though her hands were cuffed, the momentum carried her body into a sudden strike, elbow to the nearest guard's torso, just enough to off-balance him. The lead officer staggered, blinking in disbelief. The youngest officer yelped, dropping the scanner. Metal clanged against the floor. Time slowed. The air was thick, charged with adrenaline, as if the fluorescent lights themselves were holding their breath. Marla's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. Step back. Now. The officers froze, caught between disbelief and instinctive obedience. In that split second, Marla's identity, carefully hidden, radiated through her posture, her aura, her unwavering calm. They didn't yet know she was a Navy SEAL Admiral, but the room instinctively understood. This woman was not ordinary. She twisted her wrists, leveraging the cuffs to push the nearest officer into the wall, the metal frame rattling. Pain flared briefly in her hands, but she ignored it. Years of training had taught her to endure, to use every disadvantage as a weapon. Her eyes scanned the room, security camera, exit points, reflective glass, every detail catalogued in an instant. The youngest officer's face was pale, fear etched into every line. The lead officer's jaw tightened, realizing his authority was slipping like sand through fingers. Outside, the distant echo of footsteps grew louder. Backup was on the way, but Marla had anticipated this. Every inch of the room was part of her mental map. She could hear their hesitation, their uncertainty. And that hesitation was enough. Enough to gain leverage. Enough to shift the narrative from compliance to command. Identify yourself, the lead officer spat, though the edge had left his voice. Marla allowed herself a brief pause, letting suspense build, letting them stew in the uncertainty of her identity. Then she spoke, voice low but firm, each word a weapon. You want to humiliate me? You're standing in front of someone who could have ended this 5 ways before you even blinked. The officers froze, the room suspended in disbelief. Her tone wasn't arrogance. It was controlled authority, born of years in the field where mistakes were fatal. Every movement, every glance was calculated. She had turned their aggression into hesitation, their orders into confusion, their confidence into doubt. A faint flicker of recognition crossed the youngest officer's face. Wait, you SEAL? His words trailed off, disbelief making them hollow. Marla's smirk deepened ever so slightly, the first crack in the officer's perception of control. She had taken the first step. The room had shifted. The predator had become the hunted, the distant clang of boots echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Marla Kane's eyes scanned the narrow room like a hawk calculating trajectories. The security officer's initial shock had faded into panic, their authority fractured. Yet the looming threat of reinforcements made every second critical. One wrong move and she would be surrounded. The lead officer's hands hovered near his radio, trembling. We need backup." His voice cracked, betraying the disbelief gnawing at him. Marla's smirk was subtle but sharp, her mind already calculating the next few moves. She wasn't just a SEAL, she was a strategist. The room was a chessboard and every second brought new pieces into play. The youngest officer stumbled backward, glancing toward the hall, face pale. They're coming fast." His words barely registered over the rush of adrenaline pumping through Marla's veins. She flexed her cuffed wrists, testing their limits. Pain flared, but she welcomed it. Its sharpened focus made every nerve hum with precision. As the first shadow of backup appeared under the flickering lights, Marla's voice sliced through the tension. "Stop right there. Nobody moves." Her tone wasn't a threat, it was a command forged in years of life-and-death missions. The officers froze. The newcomers paused at the doorway, hesitant, sensing something off, something unspoken in the room. The lead officer tried to regain control. "Everyone calm down. He didn't finish." Marla's calculated movement turned his attempt at authority into hesitation. She pivoted slightly, using her cuffed hands to leverage the youngest officer closer to her line of sight. One motion, perfectly timed, and she established dominance without lifting her voice. Outside the glass partition, shadows shifted. More figures approached, boots clicking like a countdown. Marla's mind raced. The room was too small for a prolonged struggle, but she could manipulate perception, control fear, and delay action long enough for a decisive move. Her body, though technically restrained, exuded precision. Every step, every glance, every breath was an unspoken threat. Her thoughts flashed to the mission that brought her here. Years of planning, weeks of undercover work, everything leading to this single confrontation. She had trained for ambushes, double crosses, and betrayal, but never for humiliation under fluorescent lights with cuffs biting into her wrists. And yet, in this controlled vulnerability she saw opportunity. The lead officer stepped forward, hands shaking, voice wavering. We need to," Marla interrupted with a low, calm warning. "You have one chance to stop before this ends badly. I'm not just a consultant. You don't want to find out what I really am." The youngest officer's eyes widened, realization dawning. "Admiral Kane." His voice barely above a whisper. Recognition rippled through the room like an electric shock. Fear mixed with awe, uncertainty with respect. Even as reinforcements reached the doorway, the room's power dynamic had shifted. Marla's gaze flicked to the approaching figures. She calculated angles, distances, possible strategies. One misstep from them, one hesitation, and the tables would turn entirely. Her training screamed at her to stay patient, to let the opponent's fear grow until it became paralyzing. Every muscle was coiled, every nerve alert. The lead officer's face drained of color. "Admiral, I didn't know." His words were swallowed by the thick air of tension. Marla's subtle smirk confirmed the truth. She was the hunter now. The room, once oppressive, had become her controlled environment. The sound of boots grew deafening, echoing down the corridor, bouncing off concrete walls. Marla Kane's gaze swept the room and the approaching doorway, calculating every angle, every potential reaction. Her body was still cuffed, but her mind moved faster than anyone could anticipate. This wasn't just survival, it was strategy in motion. The lead officer stepped back, hands raised slightly, glancing nervously toward the incoming backup. Hold your positions," he ordered, but his voice wavered, lacking authority. Marla's subtle smirk confirmed the truth. The power in the room had shifted. She was no longer a target, she was a force. The first backup figure stepped into the flickering fluorescent light, hesitating. Marla's eyes locked onto him, reading every micro-expression: fear, surprise, uncertainty. She leaned slightly, letting the cuffed hands brush the edge of the bench, a motion designed to suggest both vulnerability and readiness. It was a predator's dance. Bait and control, visible weakness hiding lethal precision. "Stay where you are," she commanded, voice calm, unyielding. Each word carried weight, the unmistakable authority of someone who had led missions where hesitation meant death. The young officer, still pale, whispered behind her, She's really Admiral Kane." The revelation rippled through the room, infecting uncertainty into the ranks of both security and backup. Marla's mind raced. The room was small, the opponents numerous, but she had leverage. Every cuffed movement, every pivot of her torso, every flex of her legs transmitted silent warnings. In the corner, a surveillance camera whirred, its red eye capturing the tense tableau. Outside, she could hear the distant hum of the city, oblivious to the storm contained within four walls. The lead officer took a tentative step forward, but Marla's eyes met his. A single, silent glare froze him in place. He had underestimated her from the start, and now the weight of that misjudgment pressed on him like armor too heavy to bear. Her body tensed subtly, ready to pivot, strike, or disarm at a moment's notice. Then came the first mistake. One of the backup officers tried to close the gap, stepping past the threshold without signaling. Marla's reflexes ignited. In a fluid, almost invisible motion, she pivoted, using the momentum to jab her elbow backward into the approaching officer's chest, sending him stumbling into the wall. Pain flashed across his face, fear replaced aggression. Another officer froze mid-step, eyes widening as the first man fell. Marla's calm voice sliced through the charged air. "Do not move. One wrong step and it will get worse." Her words weren't a threat, they were a guarantee, a promise backed by decades of lethal experience. The youngest officer gasped, his face pale, realization dawning. She could take all of us," he whispered. Marla allowed a slight nod. It wasn't arrogance, it was a silent acknowledgement of control. In this moment, every man in the room understood they were no longer in charge. Outside the glass, other shadows hesitated, waiting for signals, unsure of how to breach the room. Marla's mind raced, orchestrating the next sequence of actions. She would not just defend, she would dominate, neutralize threats without unnecessary damage, and maintain control until the mission's objective was clear. The corridor outside rattled with boots, chatter, and the faint clatter of equipment. Inside, Marla Kane's eyes scanned the room with precision. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows that mirrored the fear and uncertainty etched on the officers' faces. Every second stretched taut, loaded with the potential for catastrophe or triumph. The lead officer's jaw tightened as he took a step toward the door. "We have to," he began, but his words faltered, swallowed by the room's new reality. Marla's calm, unwavering gaze pinned him in place. She had turned uncertainty into leverage. The officers, once in control, were now trapped in a psychological vice. One misstep, one hesitation, and they would bear the consequences. Her mind raced, orchestrating the chaos like a symphony. The cuffed hands were a minor inconvenience, a challenge she had already anticipated. She flexed subtly, testing the edges of the metal restraints, turning restriction into a tool. Every motion she made was deliberate, designed to intimidate without escalating violence unnecessarily. This was a display of command, not brute force. "You think this is about protocol?" she asked softly, voice carrying across the tense room. "It's about competence. Judgment. Knowing who you're dealing with before you act." The words sank in like stones in water, rippling outward, unsettling the officers. Fear and awe tangled in their minds. Some glanced at each other, questioning loyalties and authority. Others simply froze, paralyzed by the unspoken reality. Marla Kane was not just any operative. She was an admiral, a warrior who had seen the edge and returned. The youngest officer, still pale, whispered, She really could take all of us." His voice trembled, disbelief and admiration mingling. Marla's subtle nod acknowledged the truth. She didn't boast, she didn't need to. Every measured movement, every calm breath, every unflinching stare broadcast her lethal capability more clearly than words ever could. Outside, the backup hesitated at the doorway. Marla's eyes flicked toward them. She calculated angles, distances, reaction times. In her mind, she already had them contained, neutralized without a single unnecessary strike. The room, once a prison, had transformed into a controlled battlefield. Her training, experience, and calm decisiveness turned fear into a weapon she wielded without hesitation. She pivoted slightly, sending a silent signal to the lead officer, comply or be dismantled. Every muscle was taut with readiness, every nerve alert. The lead officer's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. We can handle this," Marla cut him off with a single glance. Authority wasn't in her voice, it was in her presence. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the lights and the distant thrum of the city beyond reinforced glass. Marla's heartbeat was steady, deliberate. In her mind, she replayed the mission objectives, every contingency, every exit route. She had anticipated humiliation, confrontation, even resistance, but the unfolding chaos demanded instant adaptation. Then came the first breakthrough. One backup officer, previously confident, hesitated. Marla's eyes locked on him, unyielding. He stopped mid-step, a flicker of fear crossing his face. The lead officer's grip on authority was unraveling, his confidence gone. The room's energy had shifted completely. Marla's subtle control now dominated the space. The shadow in the doorway froze for a heartbeat, a hesitation that Marla Kane's trained eyes immediately recognized. This wasn't just another backup officer. It was someone moving with certainty, a professional, aware enough to sense the tension radiating from the room. Marla's heart rate remained steady, but every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to release in an instant. The lead officer swallowed hard, realizing his authority was now meaningless. "Stay back. Don't." His voice cracked, drowned out by the weight of the newcomer's presence. Marla's eyes flicked toward the figure, analyzing gait, posture, and subtle cues. This was no ordinary threat. She had to act with surgical precision. Any mistake could expose her identity or endanger the mission. The figure stepped fully into the room, their expression unreadable under the flickering lights. Marla shifted slightly, using the cuffs to create momentum, a fluid motion that transformed restraint into leverage. Her elbows, shoulders, and core moved in perfect synchrony, a lethal dance honed by years of combat training. "Hands where I can see them," the intruder commanded, voice steady, confident. Marla's lips curved into a faint smirk. Confidence was easy to project when you knew your opponent underestimated you. She didn't answer with words, her body spoke volumes. Every movement radiated calm control and hidden strength. The first officer who had approached too quickly the corridor before had already learned the price of misjudgment. Now Marla's eyes tracked this new figure. One wrong motion from them, 1 second of hesitation, and the balance would tilt entirely. She wasn't just defending herself, she was asserting dominance, turning fear into a strategic weapon. Suddenly the intruder lunged forward, aiming to restrain her quickly. Marla's body reacted before thought. Using the momentum from her cuffed pivot, she delivered a precise sweep, toppling the intruder just enough to stagger but not injure. This was control, not brutality. Every movement was deliberate, sending a silent message: "Underestimate me and you will regret it." The room erupted into tense chaos. Officers scrambled, uncertain where to move, hesitant to take initiative. Marla's calm amidst the storm was a magnet, drawing attention, commanding instinctive compliance. Her mind calculated trajectories, distances, and timing in microseconds, predicting reactions before they happened. She was simultaneously hunter and chess master, presence and motion intertwined. The lead officer tried to regain control, stepping toward her with authority that had evaporated in the air. Marla pivoted subtly, using her cuffed wrists to deflect his approach, forcing him to stumble back. "Stop," she said softly, voice carrying that unmistakable weight. It was a word, a command, a line that separated hesitation from action. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen, the tension like a taut wire ready to snap. Then came the critical realization. The intruder hesitated, recognition dawning. She had revealed herself through subtle cues, unintentional but undeniable. Gasps echoed, voices stammered, uncertainty spiraled. "Admiral Kane," whispered one officer, eyes wide, awe mixing with fear. The young officer, still trembling, mouthed the words again, confirmation spreading through the room like wildfire. Marla's subtle nod was enough. Her identity was out and with it, absolute control. The room, once threatening, was now entirely within her command. She had turned humiliation into authority, chaos into opportunity. Yet even as adrenaline surged, she maintained perfect calm. One final, decisive step remained: neutralize the immediate threat, secure compliance, and ensure the mission could continue without compromise. The corridor's echoes of boots and murmurs grew louder, reverberating through the reinforced doors. Marla Kane's eyes swept the room one last time, calculating angles, distances, and potential reactions. Every officer inside was frozen, a mix of fear and awe making them hesitate. Outside, backup forces were closing in, unaware of the full storm within these walls. The lead officer, now pale and trembling, tried to assert authority one last time. "Everyone stand down." His words lacked conviction, a fragile veneer of control cracking under the weight of Marla's presence. She didn't respond verbally. Her body, poised and precise, communicated far more: patience, dominance, and lethal readiness. The faint smirk playing on her lips was a silent warning. Suddenly, a shadow moved outside the doorway and Marla acted instinctively. Using the cuffs to pivot, she swept the closest officer off balance, then leveraged momentum to slide along the bench, twisting her body to face the approaching threat. Each movement was controlled, economical, precise. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation, only deliberate mastery. The intruder, previously staggered, lunged again. Marla's reflexes ignited. With a controlled pivot, she deflected the momentum, causing the intruder to collide gently with the wall, incapacitated but unharmed. The remaining officers froze, uncertainty clouding their minds. Every step they contemplated was analyzed, predicted, neutralized. The room had become her arena, and she was fully in command. The youngest officer whispered, awe mingling with fear. She's unstoppable. Marla's calm nod was acknowledgement, not arrogance. Years of training, countless missions, and unimaginable pressure had forged this moment. Her identity as a Navy SEAL Admiral was no longer hidden, but that revelation had turned potential humiliation into absolute authority. The lead officer, desperate, attempted to reach for his radio. Marla pivoted again, cuffed hands striking precisely enough to push him back, signaling clearly, any action would be met with controlled consequences. Every muscle in her body radiated command. The backup forces outside, still at the threshold, hesitated, uncertain whether to enter, unsure of what awaited. Marla's mind raced through contingency after contingency, the culmination of months of undercover work. She had planned for exposure, for confrontation, for chaos, but never for hesitation this perfect, this complete. Fear, respect, awe, they were weapons she wielded without a word. She had turned every disadvantage, the cuffs, the fluorescent glare, the initial humiliation, into leverage. Then came the final moment. With calculated motion, she signaled the lead officer to his knees, commanding compliance without excessive force. The youngest officer obeyed immediately, frozen in awe. The remaining personnel, caught in the balance between fear and protocol, followed. Marla's presence alone had neutralized the room without casualties, without chaos spilling beyond the walls. Her gaze swept the room one last time. "You will remember this," she said softly, voice calm, carrying the weight of authority and consequence. "Respect is not demanded by uniform. It is earned by action, by control, by competence. Never forget it." The officers nodded, silent, transformed by the encounter. Outside, the backup forces finally hesitated, sensing the room's energy. Marla's mind already anticipated their approach. She flexed subtly, ready to command, ready to neutralize any misstep, but they didn't move. Her reputation, the aura of authority she carried, had done the work before she needed to act. The room was finally still. Marla Kane stood in the center, cuffed hands now a mere formality rather than a limitation. The officers around her were subdued, their initial aggression replaced with silent awe. They had underestimated her, assumed vulnerability meant weakness. Now they understood the truth. Strength didn't always shout, it could sit quietly, poised, and still dominate completely. Marla's gaze swept over the lead officer, whose face was pale, sweat glistening along his temples. "You have no idea what you just tried to control," she said softly, voice calm yet carrying unshakable authority. "Not just me, the mission, the lives involved, the integrity of the Navy. Underestimate any of it and the consequences are yours." The words weren't threats. They were lessons carved from experience, from every battlefield she had survived. The youngest officer, still trembling, stepped forward cautiously. "Admiral. I didn't realize." His voice faltered, uncertainty etched across his features. Marla's eyes softened briefly. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about respect, discipline, and the reminder that competence came in many forms. She had turned fear into understanding, chaos into clarity. From the corridor, distant footsteps echoed, the remaining backup had stopped at the doorway. Marla knew she had only moments before their arrival. With precise commands, she instructed the officers to secure the room, to ensure no one entered without her knowledge. Her calm authority transformed what could have been a violent confrontation into controlled resolution. Every officer, even the hesitant ones, obeyed instantly, instinctively understanding the stakes. With the immediate threat neutralized, Marla finally removed the cuffs herself, a subtle display of confidence and finality. The metal fell to the floor with a resonant clang, symbolic of the power that had shifted irrevocably. She exhaled softly, a brief moment of relief in a storm of tension. This was not just victory, it was vindication. The lead officer approached cautiously, hands raised. "Admiral Kane, your methods, they work." "I see now," Marla cut him off gently, shaking her head. "Methods aren't enough. Respect must be earned. Authority must be proven. You'll remember today not because I forced compliance, but because you witnessed the cost of underestimating someone prepared, trained, and resolute. Her eyes swept the room one last time, taking in every officer, every detail, every lingering trace of fear and awe. She had survived humiliation, confrontation, and deception. She had maintained her cover long enough to complete her mission and had done so without unnecessary violence, without compromise, without faltering. The Navy, the mission, and her personal honor were intact. Outside, the backup forces now stepped back, reporting cautiously to higher command. Marla had shifted the balance without firing a single shot, controlling perception, presence, and fear itself. She had turned what could have been a degrading moment into an undeniable display of mastery. Finally, Marla allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The ordeal was over, the mission intact, and the officers had learned a lesson they would carry forever. Strength, competence, and patience had triumphed over arrogance and assumption. Climactically, Marla stepped toward the doorway, her posture relaxed but commanding. "Remember this day," she said softly, voice carrying into the corridor, "as the day you learned the difference between appearances and reality. Never underestimate anyone again." As she exited the room, the fluorescent lights flickered once more, casting elongated shadows that mirrored the moment's gravity. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the storm contained within four walls. Inside, lives had changed, respect had been earned, and a Navy SEAL Admiral had turned humiliation into a masterclass of control, courage, and triumph.